My family thought my public breakdown would be the final nail in the coffin, proving I was too unstable for my inheritance. They never knew my quiet sister was my secret archivist, and we were about to leak their every lie online. My name is Nora, and my family tried to convince the world I was crazy so they could steal my inheritance. For a while, they almost had me convinced, too. It all came to a head at the annual Davenport Foundation Gala, the biggest charity event in Dallas. I was standing in a $1,000 dress, surrounded by flashing cameras and the polite clinking of champagne glasses, when the world began to dissolve. My heart hammered against my ribs, the crystal chandeliers blurred into streaks of light, and the sound of the string quartet faded into a dull roar in my ears. I was having a massive panic attack. As I gripped my stepmother's arm, my knuckles white, she didn't miss a beat. She kept her dazzling smile fixed for the photographers and whispered, her voice like ice, "Pull yourself together, darling. You're ruining your father's evening." They thought that was the checkmate, the final, public proof of my instability. But this wasn't just a breakdown, it was an awakening. What they didn't understand is that some of the most calculated family revenge stories don't start with a shout. They start with a moment of suffocating silence, a moment where you realize you have absolutely nothing left to lose. And in that moment, they had lost all power over me. If you've ever had to put on a perfect smile while you were falling apart inside, just to keep the peace for your family, then you know the mask I'm talking about. If you've ever had to wear that mask, just type the word mask in the comments. I want to see how many of us have had to hide our true selves just to survive. That mask was standard issue in my hometown, Southlake, Texas. It's a bubble of sprawling mansions and perfectly manicured lawns, where success isn't just a goal, it's a religion and perception is reality. Our family, the Davenports, were pillars of that community, and our home was the temple. My father, Harrison, was its high priest. A real estate mogul who built his empire on flawless presentations and aggressive handshakes. He saw my artistic sensitivity not as a gift, but as a crack in the foundation of his perfect legacy. Any emotion that couldn't be leveraged in a negotiation was, in his eyes, a liability. And my stepmother, Camilla? She was the architect of our family's flawless facade. Every dinner party was a calculated performance. Every vacation, a photo opportunity. She managed our lives like a PR campaign, and my anxiety was her recurring crisis to be managed, minimized, and hidden from public view at all costs. My younger sister, Paige, learned early that survival in our house meant being invisible. She was the quiet observer, the ghost in the machine who saw everything and said nothing. And me? I was the unpredictable variable, the pianist whose passion couldn't be quantified on a balance sheet. To them, my music wasn't a talent. It was a charming but ultimately useless hobby that took up space where a more profitable ambition should have been. I was a beautiful painting hung slightly crooked in their perfect gallery. Tell me who you were in your family portrait. Type perfect if you were expected to fit the frame, or artist if you were the one who always colored outside the lines. But my role as the artist wasn't just a social inconvenience for them. It was a multi-million-dollar problem. You see, my biological mother, who passed away when I was 6, had been a brilliant woman from a family with old money. She left me an inheritance, a trust fund designed to give me a life of independence, a life where my art could flourish without financial pressure. It was her final gift, her way of protecting me. The trust was ironclad, set to transfer entirely to my control on my 25th birthday. But my mother, in an act of love meant to shield me from harm, had included one vulnerability, one single clause that my father and Camilla would twist into a weapon. It stipulated that if I were deemed mentally or emotionally incapable of sound financial stewardship by both my legal guardian and a consulting physician, control of the fund would remain with the trustees, my father and stepmother indefinitely. Suddenly, their years of psychological warfare made perfect, horrifying sense. Every time Camilla called me overly sensitive, every time my father dismissed a panic attack as a lack of grit, it wasn't just cruel parenting. It was a deposit in their bank of evidence. They were documenting my instability, building a case against my own sanity, brick by insidious brick. They weren't trying to make me stronger, they were trying to prove I was broken. My biggest fear was no longer that they didn't understand me. My new, paralyzing fear was that they understood me perfectly, and they were using that understanding to orchestrate my ruin for profit. My own mind had become the battleground for my future, and the primary weapon in their arsenal was a special kind of poison disguised as concern. It was a full-blown gaslighting campaign. My stepmother, Camilla, was a master. She would move my piano sheet music and then help me search for it, sighing, "Oh, Nora, you'd lose your head if it wasn't attached. You're just so absent-minded when you're stressed." She'd question my memories of conversations, tilting her head with feigned sympathy. "I don't think that's quite how it happened, darling. You've always had such a vivid imagination." She even began managing my anxiety medication, telling me she was just helping me remember, only for me to find my prescription running out days early. When I'd panic, she'd say, "See? This is the instability I worry about." My father's approach was less surgical. He just bulldozed my reality. If I felt a panic attack coming on before a recital, he'd call it stage fright and tell me to get some grit. If I was exhausted from anxiety, induced insomnia, he'd say I was lazy. They created a feedback loop of anxiety and shame, constantly manufacturing evidence for the case they were building against me. You start to live in a fog, questioning every feeling, every memory. Your own mind becomes an unreliable narrator, and you begin to believe their story. You are the problem. You are broken. Gaslighting is a special kind of poison. It makes you believe you're the one holding the bottle. For anyone who has ever been made to feel crazy for telling the truth, I see you. If you know that feeling, just type "I know" in the comments. It's a quiet way of saying, I am not crazy, and I am not alone. But what my parents didn't know, what they could never have anticipated in their perfectly controlled world, was that I wasn't entirely alone in that house. There was a witness, a silent archivist, my younger sister, Paige, the one they saw as the quiet, compliant, tech-obsessed daughter who barely ever looked up from her phone. They underestimated her, and that was their most critical mistake. While I was fighting to keep my grip on reality, Paige was using her so-called obsession to meticulously document its destruction. Every gaslighting text from Camilla, she screenshotted and saved to a secure cloud server with timestamps. Texts like, "Feeling better today, sweetie? You were so irrational last night. I was worried," sent the morning after I had a completely valid emotional response to their cruelty. She learned to leave her phone in the room, audio recording, whenever my father began one of his lectures on mental fortitude. She captured him saying things I thought I was imagining, his voice dripping with condescension. "Panic is a choice, Nora. Stop choosing to be weak." But the masterpiece was her timeline. A password-encrypted spreadsheet, hidden from everyone. It was a log of every incident, cross-referenced with links to her digital evidence. An entry would read, the 22nd of July. Camilla claimed Nora was imagining chest pains. Audio file 3B proves Nora described textbook anxiety symptoms. Camilla responds by suggesting she's just being dramatic. She wasn't just protecting me, she was building an arsenal. In a house obsessed with perception, the one person they never truly saw was the one who was recording everything. She was my ghost in the machine, just waiting for the signal to bring their whole system crashing down. And the signal for that system crash came in the form of an embossed, cream-colored invitation. The annual Davenport Foundation Gala. To the rest of Dallas, it was the charity event of the season. To me, it was the stage being set for my public execution. This year was different. My father was on the verge of closing the biggest real estate deal of his career, a multi-billion-dollar project that would reshape the city skyline. The final, most skeptical investor was the guest of honor at the gala. The deal, my father made painfully clear, hinged on a flawless presentation of family unity, stability, and perfection. And the centerpiece of that presentation? Me. I was scheduled to perform a complex Chopin sonata, not as an artist, but as a prop. I was the cultured, talented, and most importantly, stable daughter, the final, reassuring touch on the perfect Davenport brand. The pressure in the weeks leading up to it was suffocating. Camilla micromanaged everything: my dress, fittings, my diet, my practice schedule, which she timed with a stopwatch. Harris would leave blueprints of the new skyscraper on my piano, a constant, silent reminder of what was at stake. The night of the gala, as my hands trembled, Camilla entered my room with a glass of water for the fast-acting anxiety pill I relied on for high-stress events. As she handed it to me, her hand slipped, spilling the water and dissolving the pill into a useless paste on my vanity. "Oh, clumsy me," she said, her eyes glinting with anything but apology. "I guess you'll just have to be strong tonight." And so I walked into that ballroom, a soldier sent to the front lines without any armor, the sound of my own frantic heartbeat already drowning out the polite applause. They didn't just want me to perform, they wanted me to break. I don't remember much of the gala after I collapsed. Just fragments. My father's face, a mask of cold fury. Camilla's sickly sweet voice telling concerned guests that I was just overwhelmed with emotion. The silent, humiliating drive home. The worst, however, wasn't the breakdown itself. It was what happened the next morning. I came downstairs to find them waiting for me in the living room. My father, my stepmother, and a calm, smiling man in a tweed jacket. They called it an intervention. Camilla's eyes were filled with perfectly rehearsed tears as she spoke about her desperate concern for my mental state. My father sat there, playing the role of the stoic, worried patriarch. And the man, a therapist named Dr. Finch who just happened to be my father's golf buddy, nodded along, using clinical terms to reframe my entire life. My passion for music became a compulsive obsession. My anxiety was emotional dysregulation. They weren't there to help me, they were there to build a case, and Dr. Finch was their star witness. And then I saw it. On the coffee table, partially hidden beneath a magazine, was a folder with the familiar logo of the bank that managed my mother's trust fund. The blood in my veins went cold. This wasn't an intervention. It was an ambush. A deposition disguised as therapy, designed to gather the professional testimony they needed to declare me unfit and seize my inheritance for good. Have you ever reached out for help, only to have your vulnerability used against you as a weapon? It's a unique kind of heartbreak. If you know what it's like to see the trap right as it's snapping shut, just type the word awake in the comments. Because that is the moment you truly wake up to the reality of who you're dealing with. The moment I saw that folder, the fog of self-doubt I'd been living in for a decade burned away. It was replaced by a cold, terrifying clarity. So I played the part they wrote for me. I nodded, I let tears fall, I agreed that I needed their help. I was the perfect, broken little bird. While my father and Camilla were exchanging self-satisfied glances with their pet therapist, I caught Paige's eye across the room. It was just a flicker of a look, a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, but it was the signal we had practiced in whispers late at night. A moment later, a piercing alarm blared through the house. The smart home system, a robotic voice announced, "Warning, water leak detected in basement." My father and Camilla shot up, their performance of concern for me instantly forgotten in their panic over their pristine white carpets. While they were scrambling, Paige met me by the back door. She didn't hug me, she didn't cry, she was all business. She pressed a small, heavy object into my hand, a portable hard drive. "Everything is on here," she whispered, her voice low and steady. "Texts, audio files, the timeline. Everything." Then she shoved a folded piece of paper into my pocket. "Aunt Juliana's number. Mom's sister. She's a lawyer in Austin. She will believe you." I grabbed my purse, walked out the door without looking back, and ordered an Uber to a coffee shop 5 blocks away. As the manicured lawns of Southlake blurred past the window, I clutched the hard drive to my chest. It wasn't just data. It was my memory. It was my sanity. It was the weapon they never saw coming. The hunt was over. The war was just beginning. The war began not with a bang, but with the quiet click of a hard drive docking into a computer. I arrived in Austin, a refugee in my own state, and walked into the sunlit law office of my Aunt Juliana. She was my mother's sister, a woman I hadn't seen in a decade, but I saw my mother's fire in her eyes. She didn't offer pity. She offered coffee and a leather chair. "All right, Nora," she said, her voice sharp and clear. "Show me the battlefield." For the next 48 hours, that office became our war room. We went through everything Paige had collected. Every manipulative text, every dismissive audio file. With each piece of evidence, I felt a piece of my stolen reality click back into place. That conversation I thought I was imagining? There was the audio. That medication Camilla forgot to give me? There was the text message timestamped as proof. I watched my aunt's face as she listened to a recording of my father telling me my anxiety was a character flaw. She didn't flinch. She just took a sip of her coffee and highlighted a line in a legal pad. She was looking at years of my pain, not as trauma, but as evidence. She was translating my suffering into a language the courts would understand. That moment, with my aunt, was the first time I felt like I had a real ally, a true defender. It's a feeling that can change everything. If you've ever had that one person who believed you when no one else would, you don't have to name them. Just type Ollie in the comments to honor them. Let's fill this space with gratitude for the people who see our truth. This isn't just about defending your trust, Nora, she finally said, closing her laptop. This is about prosecuting a conspiracy. We're filing for their immediate removal as trustees on the grounds of fiduciary misconduct and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It was a declaration of war. But my aunt taught me that in modern warfare, you don't storm the castle gates first. You cut off the supply lines. And in my family's world, their most vital supply line wasn't money, it was their pristine public reputation. A quiet legal battle, Juliana explained, would allow them to spin the narrative, to paint me as the greedy, unstable daughter. So, she said with a sharp smile, we defined the story first. We spent a week curating the most damning pieces of evidence from Paige's hard drive. We created a simple, anonymous website we called the Davenport Papers. It wasn't a messy revenge blog. It was presented like a formal leak, featuring 3 key exhibits: a chilling audio clip of my father calling my panic attack, a failure of character, a screenshot of a text thread showing Camilla's calculated medication sabotage, and a concise, factual timeline of the gaslighting campaign, placed right next to the clause for my mother's trust. Then, we didn't just post it. We sent the link from an encrypted email account to a single person, the most influential and feared society blogger in Dallas. The story broke at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. By 9 a.m., the blog post had been shared thousands of times. By noon, the local news affiliates had picked it up. The perfect Davenport facade, the one they had sacrificed my sanity to maintain, was publicly incinerated before they'd even had their morning coffee. They had spent years trying to control the narrative in the privacy of our home. We had destroyed that narrative in 3 hours with a single, anonymous email, using the one weapon they never saw coming: the cold, hard, verifiable truth. Walking into that courtroom 2 weeks later felt like a formality. The real trial had already taken place on every phone and computer screen in Dallas, and the verdict from the court of public opinion was in. My father, Harrison, the titan of real estate, looked shrunken in the witness box, his booming voice reduced to a defensive mumble. Camilla, stripped of her socialite armor, sat beside him, her perfectly composed face finally showing cracks, refusing to meet anyone's gaze. Their lawyers tried to paint me as a vindictive, troubled child. They called our story a private family matter. But you can't argue with a timestamped text message showing medication being deliberately withheld. You can't refute an audio recording of a father telling his daughter that her panic is a character flaw. The evidence Paige collected was irrefutable. The judge's ruling was swift. Harris and Camilla were removed as trustees, effective immediately, citing a clear and egregious breach of fiduciary duty and a disturbing pattern of emotional manipulation. The consequences rippled out instantly. The billion-dollar real estate deal my father had sacrificed me for? It collapsed overnight as investors fled the scandal. Camilla was quietly asked to resign from the boards of her charities. They didn't just lose control of my trust, they lost the one thing they truly worshipped: their status. As I signed the papers that officially put me in control of my own life, I didn't feel the fiery satisfaction I had expected. I just felt quiet. It was the quiet of a storm that had finally passed. The quiet of a cage door, rusted from years of being shut, finally swinging open. Freedom is a quiet thing when you first find it. For months, the inheritance they had fought so viciously for sat in an account, untouched. The real victory wasn't getting the money, it was getting my sanity back. And as I healed, I realized the ultimate act of defiance, the final chapter in this painful story of family revenge, wasn't to live a life of luxury on the funds they tried to steal. It was to use that money to build something they could never comprehend. I used my mother's legacy to create the Silence Sonata Foundation, an organization that provides grants and, more importantly, free and confidential mental health resources for young artists in high-pressure or abusive environments. I took the silence they tried to suffocate me with and turned it into a symphony of support for others who felt voiceless. Here's the truth I had to fight my way back to. Your value is never determined by the people who try to devalue you. Your reality is not defined by those who attempt to warp it. The most profound revenge is to become so wholly and successfully yourself that their narrative about you becomes nothing more than irrelevant, fading noise. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of rewriting your own script and building a future out of the rubble of someone else's expectations, then subscribe and join this community. We are all building our own legacies here, one story at a time. Thank you for listening to my journey. Remember, you can't always choose the family you are born into, but you absolutely have the power to choose the legacy you leave behind.